Hello, and welcome to this short recording that will give you a summary of the contents of Chapter 2 from the Farrell et al. 2019 text. This chapter is focused on ethics and socially responsible business behaviour, and we're going to look at various aspects and ethical decision-making associated with socially responsible business. So let's get going. In this chapter, we define business ethics and social responsibility, and we examine their importance. We look at ethical issues that may arise in the business context and how we can promote ethical behavior. We look at 4 dimensions of social responsibility, and we consider an organization's social responsibility to stakeholders such as owners, employees, consumers, the environment, and the broader community. Okay, so business ethics, what are we talking about? We're talking about acceptable behavior that is determined by an organization, but also by the stakeholders and the interest groups invested in that organization. Business ethics is also defined by competitive behavior and government regulation, as well as public or community societal values and individual values. There is an aspect of trust associated with ethical and socially responsible organizational behavior. Trust is the glue that holds any relationship together, whether personal or business. Trust in banks is lower than in any other industry, apart from media and government. We've got that in a graphic here. So people just don't trust governments, unfortunately, and businesses overall even. So how do we do this thing called business ethics and social responsibility? Well, ideally, the tone is set by the leadership team. When owners, operators, managers, executives, leaders show strong commitments to ethics and ethical compliance, then that will filter down to what happens on the ground floor. But this ethical tone from the top requires managers and executives, for example, to acknowledge their own role in supporting ethics and ethical compliance behavior. So what does that mean? It means whoever's at the top needs to communicate effectively down the line. They being the leadership team, needs to educate the managers and supervisors that have a responsibility to the rank and file workers. They, being the managers and the supervisors, need to train their employees on what to do if they are indeed faced with an ethical dilemma. Social responsibility, however, is about maximizing positive impact in the broader community and minimizing that negative impact. So in this sense, social responsibility and ethics differ. Ethics refers to ethics refers to decisions made by an individual or particular group that society evaluates as either right or wrong. And social responsibility refers to the impact of an entire organization's activities on society. Now, there's laws and regulations that need to be considered in terms of business ethics and social responsibility, and this includes the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, and this act criminalised securities fraud and stiffened penalties for corporate fraud. It was enacted after accounting scandals came to light in the early 2000s, and then as a consequence of the most recent financial recession, economic recession in 2008-2009, the Dodd-Frank Act was passed. And this act sought to reform the financial industry and offer some protection to the consumers against complex or even deceptive financial products. Okay. So across time, we've seen the standard of ethics and social responsibility change. In the 1960s, ethics was all about social issues. The Consumer Bill of Rights took front and center stage. In the 1960s, considerations with regards to business ethics was all about the disadvantaged consumer, and they began to recognise environmental issues. Product safety was a distinct concern. In the 1970s, the focus shifted from social issues to business ethics, and social responsibility came more to the fore. So issues related to diversity and inclusion, illegal bribery and discrimination, these were ethical issues debated in the day. In the 1980s, this was the era where standards were put into writing, I suppose. And we saw industries develop codes of conduct. And within industries, specific organisations identified their own internal standards for ethical conduct. So financial misconduct was rife, especially in the late 1980s. Self-regulation was prime. Codes of conduct began to emerge, as did ethics training. In the 1990s, this increased again. And so we saw corporations enacting ethical programs, and regulation was introduced to support business ethics. Community health issues became a concern, as did safe working conditions. And increased efforts were also seen to detect misconduct. And so that outcome, or that focus in the 1990s, happened because there was so much unethical behavior that came to light in the 1980s. Whoops. Now, in the 2000s, that era demanded transparency in the financial markets. Cybersecurity became an issue of concern. Intellectual property and the theft of intellectual property and the violation of intellectual property became a distinct issue in the marketplace. Regulation of accounting and financial procedures and standards intensified. Executive compensation was more scrutinized, and identity theft emerged as a significant ethical issue of the time. Now, what are we talking about when we mention misconduct? Misconduct is about ethical concerns that evolve into legal disputes. There is much grey area in business ethics. Why? Because there's no universal values or codes or even laws for a particular situation. Many times something may well be legal and yet it's unethical. So ethical conduct means building trust into your business relationships, and that can be difficult, especially if the reputation involves ethical violations. When we recognize ethical issues in business, we are required to evaluate right from wrong. When we recognize ethical issues in business, the most important step is a comprehensive understanding of what is ethical in the business world and what is not. So decisions in the context of business ethics requires knowledge of business standards and what's acceptable or not. Ralph Lauren, high-profile brand in the textile industry, and they got found out. Actually, they found out internally that one of their subsidiaries had indeed bribed a foreign official in Argentina, and quite unusually so, they took the step to acknowledge the misconduct publicly. in doing so, in fessing up, basically, they avoided charges. Now, that's not always the way that it goes down. And it is an unusual approach to fess up to the wrongdoing. That's unusual because Ralph Lauren risked damaging their corporate reputation, for example. They also risked significant backlash and indeed legal action. But because they fessed up, they avoided all of that. And what are we talking about? Bribery. We're talking about payments, gifts, or favors that have been enacted for the purpose of business benefit. Okay, so you're basically paying your way through to get a particular permit or process smoothed. And this is a violation of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. So even when US organizations venture into international markets, they are still subject to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. Now, ethical issues are not always straightforward. They're highly complex, and experience with culture in which businesses operate is critical. One principal cause of unethical behavior is aggressive financial or intentions derived from a business objectives. Yeah, so ethical issues involve much grey area. So what do we observe with regards to misconduct? Well, we, being the workers or maybe community members, according to the 2016 Global Business Ethics Survey, 22% of us have 22% of respondents of the survey, let's be specific, report observation of abusive behaviour, and similarly 22% observed lies and misinformation, and 19% observed misconduct in terms of conflict of interest. Conflict of interest means that you have a financial investment to the decision going in a particular way. So that's unethical because you've got an investment in the decision, so you shouldn't be involved in the decision. Misconduct also involves pressure to compromise standards. Misconduct also involves the reporting or non-reporting of observed misconduct. And then there's retaliation. Look at that hefty percentage of 53% experiencing retaliation for reporting misconduct. And that's a problem because that's actually illegal. Retaliation of reporting of misconduct is indeed illegal. Other illegalities is a misuse of company time. So, every time you check your Facebook when you're on the payroll, that's a theft of time. And it's quite common in the marketplace. It's maybe even socially acceptable form of misconduct. Research shows that many employees spend an average of 1 hour each day on social networking sites, and that is estimated to cost organizations billions of dollars annually. Now, we might observe, for example, or experience abusive or intimidating behavior, and rightly so. There's a spectrum, there's a continuum of abusive and intimidating behavior. It ranges from microaggressions, which might be a minor experience, to major disruptions where an employee is unlawfully retrenched, for example. But the most common ethical problems for employees include the managing of diversity in culture and inclusion in the organization. And there should definitely, ideally, ethically, be a full consideration of diversity and inclusion in the organizational culture. Bullying is associated with a hostile workplace when a particular person or a particular group is targeted, threatened, harassed, abused, overly criticized. So here is a list of the 10 actions associated with bullying behavior, ranging from spreading rumors to discrediting others' ideas, using email to demean, or maybe social media, yelling and shouting, using terminology to discriminate, even body language to hurt others or their reputation, and maybe taking credit for others' works. This is bullying behavior in the workplace, and it's rife. Misuse of company resources also includes spending excess time on personal endeavors such as personal email, submitting personal expenses on organizational reports, and using the company copier for personal use, right? Many companies have implemented official policies that delineate what is acceptable use of company resources. But Facebook and time on social media on company time is a misuse. So we mentioned earlier conflict of interest, and a conflict of interest exists when a person must choose whether to advance their personal interests or those of others. So when there's a conflict of interest, employees must be able to separate personal financial interests from the business dealings. Now, when you, the person involved, the individual, the employee involved, have responsibility for a particular decision in your corporation, and you have financial interests in the outcome, then that's unethical. Maybe another example of a conflict of interest is when you have inside information on what an organization is planning to do, or what is about to go down. And if you act on that inside information, then that too is illegal, as is accepting bribes, gifts, payments that might facilitate a process on a shorter timeline or give an individual or particular organization some unwarranted favorable advantage. So fairness and honesty is fundamental to the role of ethics in business, and employees and organizations alike must abide by laws and regulations that apply in their context. They must seek to cause no harm, and they must use organizational resources in a fair and honest manner. Of course, they must engage in fair competitive practices and provide full disclosure of any potential harm of a product. So this is why sometimes we see product recalls, because something's been identified after the product is released or distributed. And so an organization will recall a product, even though they've already rolled it out and it's going to cost them X amount of dollars to bring it back. That is less than the damage that may be incurred to their reputation, for example, especially if we're talking about consumer deaths at the extreme. Fairness and honesty must also be involved with regards to business communications. So avoiding false and misleading advertisement. So like, for example, if there's signage in a store that says $3.99 for this product, and you go to the checkout and they want to charge you $5.99, then that is actually false advertising and illegal. We want to be honest about product safety and quality. So the conditions in which a product is advised to be used is actually really important. And we want to follow the regulations with regards to labeling. So we want to follow the legalities, the laws involved, but we also want to be ethical in our labeling. With regards to business relationships, we also want to see fairness and honesty in that context, and that means keeping confidential organisational information inside the organisation. You may even be required to sign a document to that intent. It also means that in business relationships that we deliver as promised, and we avoid undue pressure that can cause others to act unethically. And then plagiarism is another ethical issue that needs to be considered in terms of fairness and honesty, because when you're using somebody else's words or ideas and claiming them to be your own, that's effectively theft. And this is why within every business school, students will experience, for example, their work being put through a plagiarism detector. Most times I don't use that software analysis because I have developed my instinct to the extent I can smell plagiarism, I can spot it. So don't try and get that one past me. You can talk to my past students about that too. All right, so when we make decisions about ethical issues, it can be a difficult time because, first of all, like we might ask the question, you know, is there an ethical dilemma here? What is the importance with regards to the choices that are available? And, you know, because ethical issues are most times so complex and so difficult to handle, they might even go unattended and unacknowledged. So how do we improve ethical behaviour in business? 3 factors are put forward by Farrell et al. 1, individual standards of behaviour and individual values that we bring to the workplace. The influence of managers and co-workers and the extent towards they exert control through authority and through their own example model behaviour, and how critical or not the managers and co-workers are with regards to compliance. So sometimes peer pressure can go a long way towards encouraging, facilitating, improving ethical behaviour in the business. But that's got to do with the organisational culture, and it's got to do with the leadership intent from the top down. Now, the third factor that influences business ethics is the opportunity to engage in misconduct. Wells Fargo in recent years has been caught out. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is a US government agency, fined the Wells Fargo Bank $185 million because they fraudulently created 2.1 million client accounts. Like they just set up accounts and put people's name on the accounts. And why did they do that? To meet their sales quota. So not only was the executive team involved, there was thousands of participating employees that were also involved, and they were fired. And so Wells Fargo we can recognize as, unfortunately, a toxic corporate culture that is facilitated by management. And employees were fired for blowing the whistle. But as I mentioned earlier, retaliation is actually a violation of ethical standards. All right, let's talk about codes of ethics, because if we're going to turn a toxic culture or improve the enactment of ethical business behavior, then we need a guide. And essentially that's what a code of ethics is. It's guidelines and principles to steer the organization towards ethical rather than unethical behavior. And this might be enforced, this code of ethics within the organization might be enforced, for example, through incentives, maybe even penalties, that are set to encourage ethical behaviour. All right, let's talk about whistleblowing. Whistleblowers are those who expose an employer's wrongdoing to the outside world. More organisations are establishing programs to encourage employees to report illegal or unethical practices internally. And I mentioned the Dodd-Frank Act earlier, which includes a whistleblower bounty program. And that is where the illegality of retaliatory actions towards whistleblower comes from. So why might why might an organisation establish a program to encourage employees to report unethical or illegal practices? Why would an organisation establish a program to encourage whistleblowing? Because it improves the ethical climate within the organisation. So the current trend is to move away from legally based ethical programs to more culturally based ethical programs. So when the organisational culture is in line with a code of ethics, then it's more likely, the organisation is more likely for the people involved to be behaving in an ethical manner. Effective business ethics programs and ethics trainings are good for business. It's good for the bottom line. Firms that manage to develop higher levels of trust actually have been shown to function more efficiently and effectively. So in this way, organizational practices and policies that are designed to improve ethical behavior and steer the organization away from toxic organizational cultures have been shown to improve organizational reputations and the bottom line. Right, so now, socially responsible requirements. We can talk about 4 stages of socially responsible requirements. Stage 1 is about financial and economic viability. When we're looking at Starbucks as the organizational example, Starbucks, and I've given you a hyperlink there to their mission statement, Starbucks offers investments a healthy return. Starbucks offers their investors a healthy return and including paying dividends. Stage 2, in terms of social responsibility, is about compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. And Starbucks, I've given you a link there to their organizational values. Starbucks actually specifies in its code of conduct, that is its internal code of conduct, that payments made to foreign government officials must be lawful according to the law of the United States and the foreign country. So Starbucks as an organization is actually going one step further than the US government on this one. The US government says that any American organization that ventures abroad must comply with US law. But Starbucks internally is saying not only must they comply with US law, they actually have to comply with the laws in the foreign land that they are deeming to enter. In stage 3, social responsibility incurs ethics, principles, and values to be considered. And in this regard, continuing with our Starbucks example, Starbucks offers healthcare benefits to not only full-time, but also part-time employees. And on the supply side, they support coffee growers by ensuring a fair market price. Now, a further evolution of social responsibilities includes philanthropic activities. And in this regard, Starbucks created the College Achievement Plan that offers eligible employees a full ride with regards to their bachelor's degree completed with Arizona State. Thank you, Starbucks. Okay, let's talk some more about social responsibility. When we talk about corporate citizenship, what we're talking about is the extent to which businesses meet responsibilities required by their stakeholders. The commitment of being a socially responsible corporate citizen indicates a strategic focus on fulfilling the responsibilities as deemed by their stakeholders. And so it involves action and measurement of the extent to which the firm embraces corporate social responsibility and following through on the appropriate initiatives. There's arguments for and against social responsibility. Let's look at the arguments for. Social responsibility rests on stakeholder engagement and benefits to society to improve the firm's performance. Social responsibility for businesses is all about using their resources to address sustainability for the environment, health for the community, and education of their stakeholders. Social responsibility for society means that businesses should support their societal communities respectively through tax contribution, for example. And socially responsible decisions made by an organisation can actually prevent increased government regulation, essentially because the organisations are self-regulating. And the final argument for a socially responsible strategy is economic. Socially responsible corporate behaviour is necessary for economic survival. Now, the arguments against social responsibility by an organisation is that it sidetracks from their primary goal of business and of earning profit. Not sure I'm going to agree with that one, because corporate social responsibility is good for the bottom line. And we will look at, in class, we will look at examples for that. Social responsibility gives businesses greater power at the expense of stakeholder interests. Again, I'm not so sure I agree with that. Here's a question: does business have the expertise needed to make decisions about social and economic issues? Well, within their organizational context, yes. Social responsibilities of the government agencies, officials, can be held accountable by the voters. In other words, some social issues are the responsibility of the governments, not the organizations. So why should organizations be involved? Because organizations are part of the community, and either they contribute to that community or they detract from that community. And then creation of non-profits and contributions are the best ways to implement social responsibility. Okay, that's one view. It's not the only view. Social responsibility issues involve relations and trust between owners and shareholders. And so there must be transparency with regards to accounting procedures, and that's why annual reports are released, for example, to provide investors with relevant information and to demonstrate not only the owner's rights, but to protect the owner's rights and investments. With regards to employee relations, social responsibility issues include workplace health and safety and adequate pay, keeping employees informed of what is happening in an organization, giving employees a mechanism by which they can raise grievances and be treated fairly in the process, and social responsibility within an organization means providing equitable and equitable opportunities regardless of your gender, age, race, religion, or nationality. For consumers, social responsibility issues include issues related to consumerism. Consumers might write letters to organizational leaders, maybe respective governments, to raise attention, knowledge of issues that might otherwise go unnoticed. Consumers might also lobby government agencies, or they might even go to the media if they don't get any response from an organization or the government agencies. So by going to the media, they are exposing social responsibility issues that need to be addressed. Consumers as a united force might also, for example, boycott a particular brand or organization that they deem irresponsible. And social media has definitely given consumers more power in this regard, a louder voice in this regard. In 1962, President Kennedy signed into law the Consumer Bill of Rights, and this law enacted the consumer's right to safety, the consumer's right to be informed, the consumer's right to choose, and the consumer's right to be heard. Now, it doesn't always go down in an ethical manner. And in the context of insulin pricing, for example, Turing Pharmaceuticals raised their price for insulin from sorry, it was Mylan. Mylan raised the price of the EpiPen from $100 to $600, and their argument was that it costs a lot of money to develop new drugs, the supply chain is complex, and insurance companies are going to pay the most of it anyway, so what does it matter? Well, $465 million later, Mylan had to fork out that settlement. Not good, not good. People dying because of pricing, unethical pricing issues in the marketplace. So social responsibility can come down to a matter of life and death for particular individuals, for specific groups in the community might experience discrimination, or in the broader environment, maybe we're talking about sustainability. And so sustainability involves the assessment and the improvement of business strategies, work practices and lifestyles, so that we acknowledge the impact on the natural environment. And so consumers making consumption choices plays a significant role, but so does organizations. This figure addresses the question of, how concerned are everyday consumers with social responsibility issues? Well, this graph tells us that more than 70% of consumers were willing to purchase socially responsible products when they're at a higher price. Even more than 80% are willing to consume less if that means a benefit to the environment. And the list goes on. I wonder where you fit on those questions. So sustainability issues involve organizational practices with regards to pollution, for example. Are they a textile manufacturing organization that is generating toxic chemicals and releasing that into the local water supply? And pollution can also be air pollution, where a haze of pollution can be seen over specific cities, such as Bangkok in Thailand, Hong Kong, LA. We can see a distinct haze of air pollution over these cities. And what's really interesting in the face of COVID is that this air pollution that was, there was no solution seen to it, because curbing that level of toxic air pollution would mean dire economic consequences. Well, then along came COVID and shut everything down anyway, and we see now a clear horizon on the Great Wall of China, across LA and other cities. Now, apart from water and air pollution, there's also noise pollution and landfill pollution, for example, that is negatively impacting the environment. Renewable energy is a distinct issue with regards to achieving sustainability in the future. So what we're talking about here is established organizations reducing their carbon footprint, reducing their level of carbon emissions, and they can do that by engaging with alternative energy sources such as solar power, such as wind turbines, for example. And there is much business opportunity associated with alternative energy sources. The sooner we get to work on that, the better. We, the community, we, the consumers who make the decisions that drive the economic behavior in industry. So there are various responses to environmental issues. We have greenwashing, for example. And greenwashing is when organizations might pitch or promote specific issues that specific issues that might obscure other organizational behavior. So the example I gave earlier of Walmart and their solar power panels being installed so that the energy use, the energy consumption of specific stores is reduced, is a minor issue when the bigger, broader issue is Walmart as a corporate predator. So that's an example of greenwashing. You've got to be able to scratch the surface and figure out how authentic and meaningful is whatever it is that they're promoting as a social responsibility behavior. Organizations need to engage in green power sources, renewable power sources, renewable energies when these are available. And some organizational executives might argue, for example, well, it's more expensive, so we're going to go with the old school fossil fuels because that's less expensive. Well, the alternative energy sources may well be expensive in the shorter term. They may be more, they may mean more investment upfront, but in the longer term, you're doing less damage to the environment. And so we get to live on Earth, you know, so. We can also engage in reducing, reusing, and recycling everything from aluminium, paper, glass, and some plastics. With regards to community relations, many businesses simply want to make their communities better places for everyone to live and work. And that's an admirable intention. The most common way that organizations will achieve this is through donations to charitable organizations. But that is kind of changing with the emergent trend of social entrepreneurism, where entrepreneurs are not only seeking to generate innovative business ideas, but they want to do so in a manner that is socially responsible and beneficial to the broader community. So that's the premise on which they start, rather than let's make some money. Okay, there you go. That's a nice point to end on. Thank you very much for your attention. And I'm very grateful that you have taken the time to listen today. I look forward to you joining me again with an overview and summary of the content in Chapter 3. Thanks then. Bye.